So today we're going to be putting together a gaming PC and we're going to see if we can do it for what is a reasonable budget in terms of today's day and age type of pricing. Of course, there's going to be two main things that you have to be aware here. The first one is going to be the GPU and getting that at the best price that you can. That's going to be the toughest. The second one is going to be actually the CPU, even though that I'm going to be using a current generation Ryzen CPU. The new Intel 12th generation is also coming out next week. So keep that in mind when looking at builds like this, not only for myself and other people. You may want to wait and consider and see what that new CPU architecture may bring. It's going to have PCIe Generation 5, as well as possibly dropping the price on the current generation CPUs as well. And in today's build, we're going to be using the DeepCool CG560. Now, I had a great time building in this case, and they did send me over this case in order for me to evaluate it and see how it was like. I thought it was really a pleasant way to build, and it's pretty cool how the front is. It's not exactly a mesh, but it's a little more open than normal. That way, you're going to get better airflow. As we know, airflow is one of the vital elements to building a PC, especially in 2021, as we have extremely, power hungry and heat producing GPUs like the RTX 3000 series. And likewise, they also sent me their CPU cooler. This is going to be the AK620. It actually looks really cool. It's almost like a monolithic design, very like futuresque looking. I really enjoyed working with this cooler, and it really fit the aesthetic very nicely of this case. The other items we're going to be using in this build is going to be the Asus Strix X570i. Now, this is a mini ITX motherboard. This is the one that I kind of wanted to use in this case just to see how it would work. I've been having a theory lately, if these smaller motherboards are, if they look okay in terms of using it in a bigger case. The main idea here is in the future, if you want to change cases and go down to something smaller, it's a lot easier to move it to a smaller case in that way. That's eventually what I plan to do with this particular build. And in the meantime, you get to use it if you don't need more PCIe slots. Of course, a bigger motherboard will fill it out and you generally will get more features, but you can't go to a smaller case in the future with a bigger motherboard. So that's going to be the reasoning for it here. And for the power supply, we're also going to be using the DeepCool 850 watt power supply. This is a great modular power supply that pretty much will take care of the 3060 Ti as well as the Ryzen 5600X. Now, the Ryzen 5600X will certainly be adequately cooled by this DeepCool air cooler. It has the dual fan design, very efficient, very quiet, and it actually does a tremendous job. Didn't have any issues at all when I was playing games and things like that. And this is certainly much better than the stock cooler that you'll get with the 5600X. Now, the GPU that we're going to be using here will be an EVGA 3060 Ti. Now, I really like the 3060 Ti, well, especially when you can get it at MSRP. I was lucky enough to be able to get this from the EVGA Q. Now, recently, EVGA did close down the EVGA Q for people that had already gotten a GPU, so to give the chance for people that are new and on the queue. So they closed everything down for now, but in the future, you'll be able to join again when they've caught up with demand. But I was able to get this pretty much at EVGA's MSRP, which was, after tax, it came out to a little bit over $500, which is really fair for a 3060 Ti. As you know, these readily sell for over $700 to $800 on the secondhand market. So that's how we can get this build a little bit better. But if you had to get it secondhand, you likely would have to add probably $200 to $300 to that price in order to make it a fair comparison. So that GPU works great in a case like this because even if it's only a 3060 Ti, these still put out a little bit of heat. Don't think that this is still an RTX 3000. Don't think because it's a 3060 Ti, it's going to be very, very cool. And even though it has a good cooler, these still put out a tremendous amount of performance. Remember, the 3070 is almost the level of a 2080 Ti, where a 3060 Ti is basically just a little bit of a cut down 3070. So it's not that far off. So that's why it's great to have a case like this with really great airflow. That way you won't have any issues with temperatures or anything like that. And here I prioritize the cooling of the GPU by putting the fans in the front of the case. That way cool air goes in and the warm air is going to exhaust out of the top. Now, you are going to have a little bit warmer CPU temperature, even with a good air cooler like this, just because the GPU is going to be spewing that hot air within the case. But considering the 5600X generally doesn't run that hot anyway, and this cooler is more than enough to be able to handle it, I think CPU temperatures are absolutely fine. I'd rather keep that GPU nice and cool because after all, that's going to be the main and most important component of the entire system. So this is really my favorite setup of hardware if I want to build a very capable gaming PC without having to break the bank, especially with more expensive expensive hardware that's just going to be diminishing returns. As far as I'm concerned, even though the 5600X is only 6 core, it does a great job for its primary purpose, and that's going to be gaming. If I needed to do content creation or something like that on this particular setup, I would either get one of the higher core AMD 5000s, or perhaps you can wait for Intel 12th generation Alder Lake. That should be coming out next week. That's going to have some interesting options as well. We haven't seen reviews yet, but it looks promising. It looks at least to be a lot better than the last generation Intel. So that's going to be interesting to see, and something that I advise that you take a look. And if you have any questions about this X570i Strix motherboard, I still think it's one of the best mini ITX motherboards. Plenty of features and fan headers and stuff like that. And of course, remember, using mini ITX, you're going to sort of forego some of the features and bigger capabilities of a bigger motherboard, not to mention space and things like that, but you do get the benefit of being able to switch this out into a smaller case or something like that if you want to be more minimalist. Now, as for the power supply, 850 watts is definitely a little bit overkill for this size system, but that allows me to upgrade into something else in the future in this particular build, be it a 3080 or even a 3090. You could easily run with this build using an 850 watt power supply, so it's going to more than handle a 3060 Ti. So overall, this was a very enjoyable build. Everything from the case to the components really made it a pleasure to put together. Then of course, the performance with airflow, that's something that having that little bit more of an open front definitely makes a big difference. Even if the system isn't necessarily completely overpowered at 3080 or 3090, the cooling is more than enough for this, and certainly would even be able to handle, I think, a much bigger GPU. So it gives you definitely some future proofing, and I think that sort of honeycomb design in the front definitely looks pretty cool as well. Alright guys, so let me know if you have any questions on the build. Remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.